My brother's wife smirked at Thanksgiving and said, "Your parents only love you when you're paying their bills." My mom laughed and added, "You're not welcome unless you clear your brother's credit card debt." I stood up, smiled, and said, "You're right, and that's exactly why you'll never see me again." Their faces dropped when they realized they had just lost their favorite ATM forever. This happened over the past year, and I'm finally ready to share the whole story. It's long, but stick with me. The ending is absolutely worth it. Some details changed for privacy. TLDR at bottom for those who want the quick version, but you're missing out if you skip to it. I, 35 male, own a successful chain of fitness centers across North Texas, 4 locations with plans for 2 more by next year. We do about $1.2 million in revenue annually, and I employ around 50 people between trainers, front desk staff, maintenance crews, and administrative workers. Not bad for a guy who started with nothing but a GI Bill and a dream after getting out of the Marines at 23. But this story isn't about my business success or how I built my empire from scratch. It's about how my toxic, dysfunctional family tried to bleed me dry for years, and what happened when I finally decided to completely destroy them, instead of just walking away like a reasonable person would do. Growing up in suburban Dallas, my family dynamic was crystal clear from day one. There were 2 kids in our household, me and my younger brother Cameron. He's 32 now. Cameron was always the golden boy who could do absolutely no wrong in our parents' eyes, while I was permanently cast as the responsible one who never needed attention, help, or recognition. You know the type of family setup. Cameron got praised enthusiastically for tying his shoes correctly, while I had to earn everything through blood, sweat, tears, and perfect behavior. When I was 17 and a senior in high school, I was working 2 different part-time jobs after school every single day to save up money for a decent used car. I worked at a local grocery store bagging groceries and collecting shopping carts, and I also worked weekends at a landscaping company doing manual labor in the Texas heat. Meanwhile, Cameron got arrested for shoplifting video games at the local mall, and instead of facing any real consequences for his criminal behavior, my parents bought him a brand new Honda Civic to help build his confidence and self-esteem. When I asked where my car was after 8 months of saving every penny I earned, my dad looked at me and said, "You're more responsible and mature. You'll figure it out yourself like you always do." After high school graduation, I immediately joined the Marines because college wasn't financially possible for me. Our family was supposedly struggling financially and couldn't afford tuition. Meanwhile, Cameron magically got his full college experience courtesy of mom and dad's mysterious secret stash of money that somehow appeared out of thin air whenever their precious baby boy needed something important. I did 5 long years in the Marines, served 2 deployments overseas, and came back home with discipline, work ethic, and real-world experience. I used my GI Bill benefits to get a business degree while working full-time at a local gym chain, learning every aspect of the fitness industry from the ground up. I lived in a studio apartment that was basically a glorified closet, ate nothing but cheap pasta, canned tuna, and peanut butter sandwiches for 3 straight years, and saved every single penny I could to open my first gym location. Cameron? He dropped out of college after 3 years of constant partying, changing majors 4 different times, and maintaining a barely passing GPA. But according to my parents, that was just him finding his authentic path in life and exploring his creative options. By the time I turned 30, I owned 2 highly successful gyms, had purchased a nice house in a good neighborhood, and was systematically building real generational wealth. Cameron was 27 years old and had never held any job for more than 8 months total. His pattern was predictable. He'd get hired somewhere entry-level, work just long enough to qualify for unemployment benefits, then get himself intentionally fired and live off government assistance while looking for the right career opportunity. But guess who was still considered the family favorite? The guy who had never accomplished anything meaningful or productive in his entire adult life. Then Cameron met Jessica, and that's when our family situation went from merely annoying to absolutely insane. Jessica was literally every negative stereotype about materialistic, shallow women rolled into one insufferable person. She had fake chest implants, fake lip injections, fake eyelash extensions, and acrylic nails so long and elaborate she couldn't perform basic tasks like typing or opening car doors. She'd never worked a legitimate job in her entire life, but somehow always managed to have the newest iPhone model, designer purses worth thousands of dollars, and clothes that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. She attached herself to Cameron like a parasitic leech because he was stupid and naive enough to think he could somehow afford her ridiculously expensive lifestyle on his unemployment checks. And my parents? They absolutely loved her, because she was supposedly motivating Cameron to be more ambitious and helping him mature into a responsible adult. Yeah, motivating him to find increasingly creative ways to spend money he didn't have and would never earn. The girl also had the intellectual capacity of a houseplant. I remember one particularly painful family dinner where she asked me if my fitness centers were like Planet Fitness, but more expensive, and then proceeded to confidently explain to me how the fitness industry worked, based entirely on what she'd seen in romantic comedies and reality TV shows. This brilliant analysis was coming from someone who genuinely believed that cardio exercise was harmful to your health because it makes you too skinny and weak. About 2.5 years ago, the phone calls from my parents started getting significantly more frequent and urgent. These weren't casual, "Hey, how's business going?" social calls, but rather direct, "Cameron needs help with his electricity bill," emergency calls. Or, "Cameron's car needs expensive repairs," crisis calls. Or, my personal favorite recurring theme, "Cameron and Jessica are having an unexpectedly difficult month financially," bailout calls. At first, the requested amounts were relatively small and seemingly reasonable. $400 here for utilities, $600 there for car problems. I'm not gonna lie, I helped out because I genuinely figured that's what family members do for each other during tough times, right? But every single time I transferred money to help them out, Cameron never once called me personally to express gratitude or explain the situation. It was always Mom making the initial request on his behalf, and Mom calling afterward to say thanks, like he was still a helpless child who couldn't handle his own communications. Then the requested amounts started getting significantly larger, and the accompanying excuses became increasingly creative and elaborate. $1,200 for their deposit on a much nicer apartment because their current place was supposedly affecting Jessica's severe allergies. She wanted to live somewhere more Instagram-worthy. $2,800 when Cameron allegedly got laid off unexpectedly, which I later discovered actually meant he got fired for showing up 2 hours late 3 consecutive days while hungover. $3,500 when Jessica supposedly needed emergency dental work, which turned out to be purely cosmetic veneers because she wanted to become a social media influencer. The breaking point should have been last Christmas, when Jessica posted elaborate Instagram stories documenting her week-long luxury spa retreat in Scottsdale, complete with expensive treatments and designer shopping, during the exact same week that Cameron had called me crying and asking for $2,200 for urgent car repairs that couldn't wait. But I was still foolishly playing the good brother role like a complete idiot. The real wake-up call came 8 months ago, when I went to Mom and Dad's house for our regular Sunday family dinner. I walk through the front door, and Jessica is practically shoving her left hand in everyone's faces, showing off this absolutely enormous engagement ring that had to cost at least $20,000. "Look what my amazing Cameron surprised me with," she squealed like an overexcited teenager. "Isn't it absolutely perfect? I've been wanting something exactly like this for months and months." I looked directly at Cameron, who was desperately avoiding eye contact, like his life depended on it. 4 weeks earlier, he had called me crying genuine tears about needing $3,800 for unexpected medical bills, because he didn't have health insurance coverage. "That's quite an impressive ring," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Must have been a very significant purchase." Jessica giggled and did this ridiculous little hair flip gesture. "Oh, Cameron always finds a way to give me exactly what I deserve. He's so generous and thoughtful about showing his love. Yeah, generous with my hard-earned money and thoughtful about hiding it from me." During that same uncomfortable dinner, Jessica made several passive-aggressive comments about how some people just aren't relationship material, while staring directly at me with obvious judgment. I was 35 and single entirely by choice. I'd been too focused on building my business empire and securing my financial future to get serious about dating or marriage. But she acted like I was some kind of pathetic failure, because I wasn't married to someone who constantly spent my money. "Maybe you should focus less on those gym things and more on finding a wife," she said with this incredibly condescending smirk. "I mean, what's the point of making all that money if you don't have anyone special to spend it on?" My mom actually nodded in complete agreement, like Jessica was dispensing profound wisdom. "She makes a really good point, Alex. You can't work every single day forever." That night, lying in my own bed in my own house that I'd paid for with my own money, I made a firm decision. I was completely done being their personal bank account. Things got surprisingly quiet for a few months after I stopped responding to their increasingly desperate money requests. I genuinely figured maybe they'd finally learned their lesson about financial responsibility, or perhaps found some other gullible victim to fund their ridiculous fantasy lifestyle. I was incredibly, spectacularly wrong about both possibilities. Then Mom called exactly 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, and I should have immediately known something major was up based on her tone alone. "Alex, sweetheart," she said in that artificially sweet, overly cheerful voice she specifically reserves for when she wants something extremely important. "Are you planning to come for Thanksgiving dinner this year?" I'd been seriously considering skipping the whole thing entirely, to be completely honest. Every single family gathering felt like an exhausting theatrical performance, where I was forced to play the role of the successful son who should be endlessly grateful for the opportunity to solve everyone else's financial problems and personal crises. But I made the crucial mistake of saying yes, I would attend. "That's absolutely wonderful." Mom sounded way too relieved and excited for a simple holiday dinner invitation. "It'll be so nice to have the entire family together for such a special occasion." The excessive enthusiasm and obvious relief in her voice should have been my first major warning sign. Mom was never that genuinely excited about holiday dinners unless there was some kind of significant hidden agenda involved. When I arrived at their house on Thanksgiving morning, Jessica answered the front door wearing what appeared to be a completely new outfit from head to toe that probably cost more than most people earn in an entire week. Her acrylic nails were freshly done with some kind of elaborate crystal and glitter design that must have required hours at an expensive salon. "Alex!" she exclaimed, with the most transparently fake smile I'd ever witnessed. "Oh my goodness, thank God you're finally here. We've been waiting and waiting for you to arrive." Red flag number 1 was practically waving frantically in my face. Cameron was positioned in the living room looking more nervous and anxious than I'd ever seen him in our entire lives together. When I walked into the room, he barely managed to look up from his phone screen, and his leg was bouncing rapidly, like he was extremely worried about something important happening. "Hey there, bro," he mumbled without making any eye contact whatsoever. Red flag number 2 was now joined by red flag number 1 in a growing parade of obvious warning signs. Dad was acting relatively normal, asking his usual surface-level questions about how business was going at the fitness centers, while Mom bustled around the kitchen, making unnecessarily dramatic gestures and movements. Everything seemed fairly normal and routine, until we all sat down at the dinner table with our plates full. That's when Mom cleared her throat in that very specific way and gave me that particular look, the exact same expression she used to give me when I was a kid, and she was about to ask me to do extra household chores that Cameron somehow always managed to get excused from doing. "So, Alex," she said, while cutting her turkey with almost surgical precision and deliberate movements, "Cameron and Jessica have some really exciting news they want to share with the entire family. Here we go with whatever elaborate scheme they've cooked up this time." Cameron shifted uncomfortably in his chair like he was sitting on something sharp and painful. "We're getting married next month." "Congratulations," I said, though something felt seriously off about the rushed timing and urgency. Why the sudden need to get married so quickly? "It's going to be absolutely beautiful and perfect," Jessica gushed dramatically with obvious excitement. "Small ceremony, just immediate family members. Very intimate and romantic." Mom smiled with obvious pride and satisfaction. "They found the most perfect venue possible. Very elegant and sophisticated. I waited patiently because I knew from years of experience that there was always a catch with these people. The only thing is," Cameron finally said, while staring directly at his plate instead of looking at me, "we're running a little short on the deposit for the venue and all the catering expenses." And there it was, the real reason for this mandatory family dinner gathering. "How short are we talking exactly?" I asked, even though I already knew this was going to be completely unreasonable and outrageous. Cameron and Jessica exchanged one of those meaningful looks that couples share when they're about to tag team someone for money. Then Jessica leaned forward across the table with this incredibly entitled smile that made my skin crawl with disgust. "It's honestly not that much money when you think about it," she said dismissively, waving her hand like she was discussing pocket change. "Just $22,000. I genuinely almost choked on the food in my mouth. $22,000? Well, Mom jumped in immediately, clearly having rehearsed this presentation. "When you actually break it down properly, it's really quite reasonable for a quality wedding. The venue rental is $6,000, professional catering is $10,000, floral arrangements are $3,000, and then there's the photographer, the musicians, the cake, and all the other essentials." "Hold on just a minute," I interrupted firmly. "You haven't actually paid for any of this stuff yet?" Jessica's fake smile got noticeably tighter around the edges. "We put down small deposits to hold everything, but all the full payments are due next Friday." I looked around the table slowly and deliberately. Everyone was watching me with expectant expressions. Like this whole elaborate setup was already decided, and I was just going through the motions before opening my wallet and solving their problems. And you want me to pay for your entire wedding? Not pay for it exactly, Cameron said quickly, trying to sound reasonable. Just help out significantly. You know, as a generous wedding gift from my successful big brother. Jessica actually laughed out loud, and it was honestly the most condescending sound I'd ever heard in my entire life. I mean, what else would you spend your money on anyway? You don't have a wife or children or any real family responsibilities. Your parents only love you when you pay their bills. The entire room went completely silent. Even my parents looked genuinely uncomfortable with how directly and brutally she'd just insulted me. I set down my fork very carefully and leaned back in my chair, staring at my mother. Is that true, Mom? Instead of denying it, Mom actually smiled and nodded. Well, if you're not willing to help family, then you can't come to family events anymore. You can't come unless you pay off your brother's credit card. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd done, all the money I'd given them over the years, this was how they really saw me. Not as a son or brother, but as a wallet. I stood up slowly, grabbed my jacket, and smiled back at her. You know what? You're absolutely right, and that's why you'll never see me again. The change in the room was immediate and dramatic. Mom's confident smile vanished instantly. Dad's face went white. Cameron looked like he'd been slapped. Jessica's smug expression faltered as she realized what had just happened. Their faces completely dropped when they realized they had just lost me forever. Wait, Alex, I didn't mean... Mom started, but I was already walking toward the door. Yes, you did mean it, and now you get to live with it. And I walked straight out the front door without looking back. For 3 solid weeks after that Thanksgiving disaster, my phone was constantly buzzing with incoming messages from every family member. Long, guilt-tripping text messages from Mom about how disappointed and hurt she was by my selfish behavior at dinner. Multiple voicemails from Dad lecturing me extensively about family loyalty and stepping up when it really matters. Even several pathetic messages from Cameron, though he was mostly just whining about how I was ruining his special day and destroying his happiness. But the absolute best and most entertaining messages came directly from Jessica herself. This woman sent me literal multi-paragraph essays about how I was a selfish, bitter person who was obviously jealous of Cameron's happiness and success in life. She called me pathetic for being single at my age, strongly suggested I was probably gay, and finished with increasingly vague threats about how I'd definitely regret this decision when Cameron becomes wildly successful. The irony was absolutely incredible. She was calling me jealous while literally begging for my money to fund her expensive lifestyle and fantasy wedding. I carefully screenshotted every single message she sent me and saved them in a dedicated folder. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, all the messages stopped completely. I genuinely figured they'd either found some other gullible victim to fund their ridiculous wedding, or maybe they'd finally decided to have a much smaller ceremony they could actually afford with their own limited resources. I was completely wrong about both possibilities, as usual. 4 weeks later, my friend who works as a loan officer at a major regional bank called me with some very interesting and concerning information. Hey, weird thing happened at work today, he said casually. I saw your brother and his fiancée at our main branch earlier this afternoon. My stomach immediately dropped with dread. What were they doing there? They were asking about substantial business loans. But here's the strange part. They were using your fitness centers as collateral and financial references. My blood went ice cold. What exactly do you mean by that? They had official-looking paperwork claiming Cameron was a 50% business partner in your company. The loan officer who met with them was immediately suspicious because the documents looked potentially fraudulent, so they didn't approve anything. But I thought you should definitely know about this situation. I hung up immediately and called my business lawyer. After some investigation and research, we discovered that Cameron and Jessica had been systematically attempting to secure substantial loans all across the Dallas metropolitan area, using completely forged documents claiming Cameron was a major owner of my fitness center chain. They'd even created elaborate fake employment records showing Cameron as my director of operations, earning $85,000 annually. They were actively attempting to commit serious fraud using my business reputation, credit history, and financial standing. That's when I realized that these people had crossed a line they could never come back from, and I needed to completely destroy them instead of just walking away and ignoring the situation. I spent the next 6 weeks methodically gathering every piece of information I could find about their situation. I didn't hire any private investigators or do anything overly dramatic. I just started paying very close attention to details and asking the right questions to the right people in my network. First, I discovered that the wedding was definitely still happening despite their obvious financial problems. They'd somehow managed to scrape together enough money for a small ceremony at some budget venue outside the city limits. But here's what was particularly interesting. Jessica was telling everyone on her social media accounts that they'd chosen to have an intimate wedding and that certain people who weren't supportive of their love weren't invited to attend. She was actually spinning my refusal to fund their wedding as me being deliberately excluded from their special day. Then I uncovered something extremely interesting about Jessica's background. My banker friend mentioned that Jessica had visited his branch several months earlier when she and Cameron first started dating seriously. She'd attempted to open a business account for some multi-level marketing scheme, and during the standard credit check process, several major red flags had appeared on her financial history. I asked him to dig a little deeper into her background information. Banks share data with each other, and he owed me a significant favor from when I'd helped him get an excellent deal on gym equipment for his home workout room. What we discovered was absolutely incredible and eye-opening. Jessica had quite the documented financial history with men. She'd been married before, not once but twice previously. Both times to men with substantial money and assets, both marriages lasting just long enough for her to gain legal access to their financial accounts and property, and both ending in extremely nasty divorce proceedings, where she walked away with significant portions of their assets while claiming various forms of emotional and physical abuse. Cameron was going to be husband number 3, and he had absolutely no idea about any of this history. But that wasn't even the most interesting discovery I made. The most fascinating part was what I learned about their current financial situation through various sources. Remember all those emergencies and unexpected expenses that Cameron had been asking me to help with over the past 2 years? Well, those emergencies were real in a certain sense. Cameron had been getting deeper and deeper into serious debt, trying to maintain Jessica's ridiculously expensive lifestyle and spending habits. But instead of cutting back on expenditures or having honest conversations about money, they'd been taking out payday loans with outrageous interest rates, opening new credit cards constantly, and borrowing money from anyone who would lend it to them. They weren't just regular broke, they were catastrophically, devastatingly broke. The kind of financial situation where you're literally one missed payment away from losing absolutely everything you have. And Jessica? She had no clue whatsoever about their real situation. Cameron had been desperately hiding their actual financial condition from her, while frantically trying to find new ways to keep the money flowing and maintain the illusion of financial success and stability. That's when I realized Cameron wasn't just the spoiled golden child anymore. He was completely trapped, probably terrified, and definitely in way over his head with a woman who would completely destroy him the instant she discovered he couldn't afford her lifestyle anymore. So I decided to dramatically accelerate that inevitable discovery process. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in February. I obviously didn't attend the ceremony, but I had much more important and strategic plans for that weekend anyway. You see, I'd spent several weeks carefully putting together a comprehensive information package that would change everything. Screenshots of Jessica's insulting text messages calling me pathetic and jealous. Complete copies of all the fraudulent loan documents they'd attempted to use with my business information forged on them. And the absolute crown jewel of evidence, a detailed background report on Jessica's 2 previous marriages, her well-documented history of financial manipulation and gold digging, and complete documentation of their current catastrophic debt situation. But I didn't send any of this damaging information to Cameron directly. That approach would have been too easy and predictable, and he probably wouldn't have believed any of it coming from me anyway, given our family dynamics. Instead, I sent the entire comprehensive package directly to Jessica's mother with detailed explanations. Here's what my thorough research had revealed about Jessica's family background and situation. They were legitimately old money wealthy, but absolutely obsessed with social status, public appearances, and family reputation. Her father was a successful investment banker at a prestigious firm, and her mother was one of those high society country club women who cared more about maintaining their family's social standing than anything else in the world. They'd been financially supporting Jessica for years without question, but they were operating under the impression that she was in a committed relationship with someone financially successful and stable with good prospects. They had no idea that Cameron was completely broke and drowning in debt, and they definitely had no knowledge whatsoever of their daughter's well-documented history of systematically marrying men specifically for their money and assets. I sent the complete information package to her mother with a simple, straightforward note. I thought you should know exactly who your daughter has married and what kind of financial situation she's actually gotten herself into. The wedding ceremony took place on Saturday afternoon. By Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, my phone was ringing insistently. It was Cameron, and he sounded more completely destroyed than I'd ever heard another human being sound in my entire life. "Alex," he said, and his voice was literally shaking with raw emotion. "I desperately need to talk to you about something extremely important." "What's going on, Cameron? Can you possibly meet me somewhere today? Please? I'll pay for coffee or lunch or whatever you want." He sounded so completely broken and utterly defeated that I almost felt genuinely sorry for him. Almost. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near my main gym location. When Cameron showed up 30 minutes later, he looked like he hadn't slept properly in several days. His eyes were completely bloodshot, his hands were visibly shaking, and he kept looking around nervously like he was afraid someone dangerous might be following him. "She's completely gone," he said, without any preamble or greeting. "Who's gone?" "Jessica. She left me permanently, took absolutely everything valuable and just disappeared." I raised an eyebrow with genuine curiosity. "Everything?" Cameron nodded miserably. "All the wedding gifts we received, the money her parents had given us for the honeymoon, even our security deposit for the apartment. She cleaned out our joint bank account down to the very last penny and vanished completely." "What exactly happened over the weekend?" "Her parents called her early Sunday morning while we were still at the hotel. They'd somehow gotten incredibly detailed information about our real financial situation, about my actual employment situation and our debts. They flew down here immediately and had this massive, screaming confrontation with her in the hotel lobby." Cameron ran his hands through his hair frantically and repeatedly. "She tried desperately telling them it was all lies and misinformation from jealous people, but then they started asking very specific questions about money, about my employment history, about all our credit card debts and loans, and she suddenly realized the complete truth about everything. She realized you're completely broke and have been lying to her. Worse than just broke. We owe over $50,000 in credit cards, payday loans, and personal debt from friends. Her parents immediately cut her off financially and told her she was completely on her own from now on. And Jessica," he laughed with absolutely no humor whatsoever. "She looked directly at me and said, 'I definitely didn't sign up to be poor and struggle,' and just walked out of my life forever." I sipped my coffee calmly and waited patiently for him to continue with his story. "Alex, I'm completely screwed beyond repair. Like, absolutely and totally ruined beyond any hope of recovery. The apartment rent is due this week, all the credit card minimum payments are due, and I literally cannot make any of them. I'm going to lose everything I have left. What about mom and dad? Can't they help you out?" Cameron's face completely crumpled with shame and embarrassment. "They don't know how catastrophically bad the real situation actually is. They think I just need help with a few monthly bills and regular expenses. If they knew the actual truth about everything," he trailed off helplessly, "they'd be disappointed in you. They'd completely disown me forever and never speak to me again. You know exactly how Dad feels about financial irresponsibility and poor life choices." I almost started laughing at the incredible irony of the situation. Dad claimed to hate financial irresponsibility above all else, but he'd been directly enabling Cameron's terrible decisions for years and years without even realizing what he was doing. Cameron looked up at me with the most desperate, pleading eyes I'd ever seen from another human being. "I know I've completely messed up everything in my life. I know I've been a terrible brother to you for years. But I'm literally begging you, Alex. Please help me one more time. I need your help more than I've ever needed anything in my entire life." "How much help are we talking about exactly?" $50,000 minimum. Maybe 60 to get completely clear of everything and start over with a totally clean slate. I leaned back in my chair thoughtfully and studied his desperate face. $60,000. To clean up a disaster that should never have happened in the first place if he'd made even one responsible decision. You know what, Cameron? You're absolutely right about some things. You did completely mess up everything, and you have been a terrible brother to me for most of our adult lives. His face fell with crushing disappointment and despair. But more importantly than any of that, you've been a user and a parasite for your entire adult life. For years and years, you've treated me like your personal ATM machine that exists solely for your benefit. You've never once asked how I'm doing personally or professionally, never offered to help me with anything whatsoever, never even bothered to say thank you when I bailed you out of your various messes and crises. Alex, please, I'm literally begging you on my knees. I'm not finished talking yet. My voice was ice cold now. You married a gold-digging manipulator who insulted me repeatedly in our parents' house and then tried to commit serious fraud using my business reputation and credit. You've spent years systematically taking advantage of my success while contributing absolutely nothing to this family except constant problems, drama, and financial emergencies. Cameron was openly crying now, with real tears streaming down his face. I know. I know everything you're saying is completely true. I'll change totally. I swear on everything holy. I'll get a real job immediately. I'll pay you back every single penny with interest. I'll do whatever you want me to do. No, you won't change. I stood up and put on my jacket deliberately. You know why you won't actually change? Because you've never actually had to face real consequences. Every single time you've screwed up your life completely, someone has been there to fix it for you without question. Mom, Dad, me. We've all been enabling your pathetic, irresponsible behavior for decades. I looked down at him, completely pathetic and broken in his chair like a defeated child. So here's exactly what's going to happen moving forward. You're going to go home and figure this entire mess out completely by yourself. You're going to get any job you can possibly find and work your way out of this financial hole $1 at a time over many years. And maybe if you actually learn something meaningful from this experience and demonstrate real change, in a few years, we can discuss having some kind of genuine relationship. Alex, please don't do this. I'm your brother. No, I said firmly, walking toward the door without looking back. You're my parents' son. There's a significant difference between those two things. And I walked away from him forever. 6 months later, I heard through Mom that Cameron had filed for bankruptcy and was living in a tiny studio apartment across town, working double shifts at a warehouse loading trucks for minimum wage. Jessica had married some corporate lawyer she'd met on a dating app within 2 months of leaving Cameron. Mom and Dad kept pressuring me relentlessly to help him out financially, to be the bigger person, and forgive family because blood is thicker than water. I told them exactly the same thing I told Cameron. Some crucial life lessons can only be learned through direct personal experience and consequences. Cameron still calls me occasionally now, maybe once every few weeks. He's not asking for money anymore. He finally learned that particular lesson the hard way. He's just trying to check in and slowly rebuild some kind of relationship from absolute scratch. The conversations are incredibly awkward and stilted, but maybe that's exactly how genuine change and growth has to start.